I'm Helen Norbury, and this is Becoming Unapologetically Me, the show all about authentic self-expression with expert guests from the fields of health, leadership, and mindset. This show is here to show you that you don't need to conform to the expectations that friends, family, and society have of you, and actually what we can unearth when we find the courage to become the unapologetic version of who we are. Grab a cup of coffee and get your notepad out for this week's episode. Hello, and welcome back to Becoming Unapologetically Me. Today, I'm really excited to be talking to Héloïse Haupt. Héloïse is going to talk to us today about the fascinating topic of what it means to be authentic and unapologetic in our sexuality. And I just thought when we were talking about this before airing this episode, how many of us have looked to another person to fix us or to make us feel loved and lovable and attractive? And how many of us have judged our own desires and fantasies and preferences? And so I really wanted to have this conversation. So welcome, Eloise. And I'd like to start today by asking you, what was the catalyst for you getting into this work and really starting to explore self-love and intimacy and pleasure?
Oh, Helen, thank you so much for having me here. And I'm so excited to dive into this topic. So I feel it's something that we really don't speak about. And so for me, I faked my orgasms for 15 years. And during that time, I'd never once had a conversation with someone which either owned up to faking the orgasms or was comfortable speaking about it. And as women, I feel we grow up and not many of us are told that our pleasure is important, that it's something that actually matters, that we should prioritize this about ourselves. So we see these beautiful movies and these rom-coms and it's, boy meets girl and there's all this passion and they rip their clothes off and then everything just seems to work. And very few people are having the conversation around what if it doesn't work like that? What if things don't flow so easily and freely? So I got into this work because for me, things didn't flow so freely and easily. The first time I was intimate with someone, I was 16 years old and I felt nothing. And here I was in this supposedly earth-shattering, life-changing experience. I was having sex for the first time and I felt nothing and I didn't know what to do. And for a lot of us, our desire to feel like we belong, we're socially acceptable. I didn't want to upset him or make him think there was something wrong with him. So I faked it. And that started a long pattern of faking it because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know who to have the conversation with. I didn't know who to turn to for support around this. And all my friends at the time seemed to be having amazing experiences. So that only made me feel more shame, more guilt around the fact that I was feeling nothing. Yeah. And the reality is there was nothing ever wrong with me. I just needed a little bit of extra support, a little bit of extra guidance to understand my body and better understand how my body works and functions and what I needed in order to feel pleasure. And it took me 15 years going through another bad breakup where I realized I was doing everything for everyone in all of these relationships. So in many ways, I'd become a doormat. And I'm sure many women can relate with this, where we want this love so badly that we will do anything in order to get that love. But in doing so, we forget a big part of who we are. We pretend to be someone that we're not. We might fake it. We might pretend to enjoy our sexual experiences in the hope that this is going to give us the love we so badly crave. Yeah. And the reality is the more we pretend to be someone that we're not, the harder it is for someone to actually love us for who we are.
Yeah. Isn't that true in so many aspects of our lives, not just within our sexual relationships, but, whether that's in our friendships as well, our relationships with our family, our work, everything. I can really resonate with that. And the other thing as you were talking that was really coming to my mind was I was brought up in, a fairly religious family, and that the only intention around a sexual relationship was to procreate and to have a child. And that was really the purpose. And the only thing that you really needed to focus on was around that. And pleasure was definitely not part of that conversation. How do you think, as women particularly, that our relationship with pleasure evolves as we get older?
So I think as we get older, we develop a little bit more self-confidence. So does the list of things that we need to do in our lives. And so
Sure.
one of the main things I see in all of my clients is, we've been fed this narrative that as women, our role is to take care of everyone around us. And so if it's our role and our job to take care of everybody around us, we're often the last thing on that never-ending to-do list. And so our pleasure doesn't feature because pleasure for many of us feels frivolous. It feels unimportant. It's like, oh, well, I'll get there when I get to it. We think
And nice to have.
Yes, nice to have that bubble bath that we're going to do once in a while. And we don't realize that if we're not focused on our pleasure, if we're not prioritizing ourselves essentially throughout the day, that we're going to have so much less to give everyone in our lives.
Absolutely.
We're giving from an empty cup. And that also builds resentment and frustration because we're doing all of these things in the hope that other people are going to notice and automatically take care of us.
Yeah.
But then that doesn't happen. And so particularly when it comes to relationships, we start struggling. We start feeling, oh, well, our partners don't see us. They don't get us, And when we don't think about our pleasure, when we're not speaking about pleasure, it also affects us sexually because our pleasure is not a priority. If it's something we're not at all even speaking about. And like you say, if we've grown up in a religious home or even not in a religious home, if we're just grown up in today's society where everything's focused on pleasure for someone else, except for the woman, it's my role is here to take care of your needs, never my own needs. Therefore, I don't have needs. So my pleasure doesn't even come into the equation. Then it's very difficult to prioritize yourself, to prioritize your pleasure and the things that actually feel important to you or give you enjoyment and joy in your day-to-day life.
100%. Yeah. So who were the people or what were the experiences in your childhood and growing up that really you think shaped who you are today?
So I have two really loving, amazing parents, and I love them with all my heart. And a big piece of this work that I've done has been recognizing that my parents did the very best that they could with the information they had at that point in time. And so I think all parents, generally speaking, there are some abusive parents out there, but generally speaking, most parents want to give their children everything they can.
100%. Yeah.
And having said that, they also don't sometimes know what their children need at a particular point in time. And so for me, there was a lot of subtle subconscious cues that I was getting that my sexuality was not okay, that it was not okay to touch and explore my body. Simple things of if you're a little child running around naked on the beach and your hand gets pulled away from your genitals, that happens a few times over. No one needs to tell you that's bad.
Yeah.
But you somehow pick up that, oh no, this is a part of my body I don't touch, I don't explore. And so for me, I, over the years, had figured out how to touch my body, how to masturbate, and I derived pleasure from that. But I also knew it was something very wrong that I should not be doing. And so I started hiding that and suppressing the side of me to fit in. And so a big part of the work that I've had to do is really acknowledging that, this is something very normal, natural, and healthy, and starting to speak up about that. I think for so many of us, it's when we think about sexuality, we carry so much shame. And a lot of that shame is because it's all in the shadows. We don't get to speak about these things.
Yeah.
So me doing this work, I had to have a conversation with both of my parents that I'm changing career and I'm going to be a coach and this is what I'm focusing on.
Yeah.
And that was not an easy conversation to have, but it was definitely part of this process.
Yeah. It's a really interesting one, isn't it? That example that you give about a young child running around on the beach and where they put their hands. And, how do you think we encourage our children to feel safe and to not feel that shame around any part of their body? And at the same time, be appropriate and realize that not everybody can touch them there because that isn't okay, but they can touch themselves there and that is okay. So how do you think we balance that up? I'm a parent and I've got teenage children. It's a really relevant time of their lives to be having these conversations. So I'm really curious as to your thoughts on that.
So I think the more work we do on ourselves around our sexuality, the less shame we feel. So for a lot of parents, they're feeling so much shame around having this conversation. Yeah. Children pick up on that. So if you've done your own work on that, it's going to be a little bit easier to have these conversations. And then it's also remembering, I like to share with people that my first memory of touching my body, I was 5 years old. So not every single child is that young. But I was that young. And at that point in time, there was nothing sexual about what I was doing. For me, I had just figured something out whilst exploring my body that felt good to me. That was it. And so I think for a lot of parents, we come at it with this sexual lens, and we need to remember that there's age-appropriate information for children, and that a 5-year-old is just doing something that feels good to them. So if you're going to look at it and be, this is bad, this is wrong, they're not going to understand why, and they're going to assign some story to what you're doing. Whereas if you share with them, what you're doing, there's nothing wrong with this, but this is something we do in the privacy of our home. You can do it in the bedroom where mom and dad are, in the house, but we don't do this at school. That's all they need to know. They don't need more information than that.
Yeah.
And if we start creating an environment where we can start having these conversations, speaking about these things, another big topic is using correct terminology. So how many of us grew up with fanny and woo-woo and the down there and the private bits? So we don't even have the correct words to speak about what we need to speak about. And so straight away, your nose is your nose, your elbow is your elbow. But when we're speaking about our genitals, we've got a whole wide array of strange words to describe them. And again, that feeds to the shame and the discomfort that we feel when we have these conversations. So if you raise your children that, it's a penis, it's a vulva, you can then have conversations down the line very normally and naturally.
Yeah. Of course. So we've touched already on the fact that growing up, especially as women, so many of us are taught that our role is to support other people and their needs and to nurture their needs. So how do we start to balance that up with probably still wanting to do that, but at the same time also focusing and prioritizing our own needs as well?
So I think for me, that all starts with self-love and self-acceptance. And I know that's something that everyone speaks a lot about, but for me, it really is. It's very difficult to prioritize yourself if you do not think you matter. It's very difficult to take time out of your day to prioritize your pleasure if, you're having negative thoughts about yourself and you think you're a terrible person and there's no point in doing this. So for me, the starting point really is with self-love and acceptance. So if we can start accepting ourselves, accepting that we are worthy and deserving of love and time and energy, that really is the foundational piece. Because if we start acknowledging that we're a human being, as imperfect as we are, we're still amazing, we're unique, we've got our own set of amazing gifts to give to this world, right? We get to take up space, we get to express ourselves.
Yeah.
If we get to see that, it's a lot easier to then start prioritizing our pleasure, start prioritizing the things that are important to us. And what that does is it creates an environment and a space where we can start speaking up. Because the biggest issue is we're going to struggle to speak up if we feel our voice doesn't matter, if we feel our opinions don't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we talked a little earlier about as we get older, we tend to become more confident and, that can have knock-on effects into our sexuality as well. But do you believe that it's kind of a bit of a chicken and an egg question? That does pleasure and connection to our true self within the context of our sexuality, does that give us confidence outside of the bedroom as well? Or is it confidence outside of the bedroom that kind of feeds it back in? Or how do you see those two things working together?
So for me, I've seen quite a few people that have been confident outside of the bedroom and then not confident in the bedroom. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I've noticed in the work that I do with women, which I always find so mind-blowing, is that when women choose to work on their sexuality, the changes they see in their life ripple out into all areas of their life. So it's something that kind of expands and moves into all areas. You cannot work on your sexuality without working on boundaries, on consent, on what you like, what you don't like. If you start feeling more confident in your body image is going to change. How you perceive yourself is going to change. And all of these things are necessary in order to enjoy your sexual experiences. If you're there hiding under the covers with the lights switched off, terrified that anyone's going to see 1 square inch of your naked body, you're going to struggle to enjoy that experience. So we need to work on all of those aspects when we're working on our sexuality. And in many ways, when we think of, ourselves as these beautiful whole human beings, our sexuality tends to be this one aspect that's locked in this tiny little box. Mm-hmm. And we have this belief that we're not speaking about it, we're not confronting it, we're not doing anything about it. until 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night, whatever it is, when all the kids are in bed and everything's wrapped up. And now we step into the room and suddenly we get to unlock this box and now we need to be sexual.
Yeah.
And that's
absolutely.
just not how it works. Our sexuality is a part of us. So that's why, you can see confidence outside of the bedroom. But if women haven't really done the work to fully incorporate their full sexual selves into their entire lives, then there's always going to be the slight disconnect. There's always going to be a piece that doesn't feel aligned, that doesn't feel like everything's working cohesively together, because we're disowning this piece of ourselves, which in many ways is our power. It's a huge strength. It's a source of so much energy and joy in our lives.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. I remember reading something many years ago about how you can't selectively suppress emotions. It's you either suppress your emotions or you feel all of them, but you can't go, I just want to like downplay the anxiety bit and the sadness bit and I'll keep the joy up here. It doesn't work like that. You kind of mute everything. And so what you're saying about if we're not embracing our sexuality in all of the aspect, like every hour of every day, then how can we just expect to switch it on at 8, 9 o'clock at night and, suddenly be this other person? So yeah, that really makes a lot of sense. So how do you encourage people to find what's the most important of them in finding joy and self-pleasure, intimacy, and doing that in the context of quite intense judgment at times from society, from families, from communities? How do you marry those two things together?
So for me, it's creating a safe space for women to explore. So it's really difficult to figure out what you like and what you don't like if you don't have a space to freely explore. And so for many of us, we're born innocent. We don't think anything of our sexuality. It's not even a topic that pops into our minds.
Yeah.
And if we were given the freedom and the time to continue exploring our bodies, we would explore them freely. There would be no shame associated to it. Unfortunately, we live in a world that has shamed us. So for many of us, we carry these stories, limiting beliefs of how we should be as a woman, slut shaming, shaming women for being overtly sexual. So there's a lot of fear around being who you are as a sexual being. We also have this idea of the Virgin Mary, the virginal mother, right? So moms are not meant to be sexual. Yeah. And if that's the case, well, then, from when you have children, what are you meant to do? So when we have this belief that who we are goes against what we should be, we suppress our sexuality, we suppress a side of ourselves. So for me, the work that I hold women in is really exploring what that expression for them looks like. So a lot of us, we see movies, we see how sex should look, what it should look like, what we should enjoy, what we should like. But it's not necessarily what we actually enjoy, like, and want for ourselves. So for me, it's taking time, exploring what that is for you. And that's why for me, a self-pleasure practice is one of the most important practices that a woman can ever do. Because a self-pleasure practice is you creating the time to just explore your body without pressure, without expectation, figuring out what you like, what you enjoy. How does your body want to be touched today? What would feel good to you today? So it's not about anyone else. When we shift that focus inwards and we explore what we need, what feels good to us, we start learning and discovering our own roadmap to pleasure, our path to pleasure. And it makes it a lot easier to answer the question, what you want, what you like. Whereas for many of us, we've never explored what we need, want, and like. And so answering those questions feel impossible because we actually don't know.
We don't know.
And, if we're carrying all of these limiting beliefs and ideas around, well, I shouldn't be sexual, it's bad, someone's judging me, I've got to think about the kids in the room next door, what I'm doing is bad and wrong. It's going to be very difficult to let go and surrender to your experience.
Yeah. It's bringing up an image in my head of the film Coming to America. I don't know if you know that film. It's a real 80s film. But this guy's wife or wife-to-be is literally there going, whatever you want, whatever you want. And actually having no opinion or thoughts of her own. I mean, it's quite a comedic scene, but I think the point that runs underneath it is pretty serious. And, as you're talking to as well.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And I think, it goes further because we look at our society and we're wondering, we've got this narrative where women just don't seem to be as sexual as men. Women are struggling so much with their libidos and they don't want sex. And why don't they want sex? And what's going on? And the reality is, if you've grown up slut-shamed, told that this is bad, that this is wrong for you, sex is only for procreation. Also, if your definition of sex is, penis and vagina penetration, something that majority of men orgasm from, but very few women orgasm from that and derive peak pleasure from that. So if that is your definition of what this should look like, it's no wonder you're struggling with desire and libido issues, because what you're doing isn't actually working for you. So you're not going to desire something that doesn't feel good to you. That's only natural. So there's nothing wrong with you. It's just what we're being fed and told we should enjoy isn't actually what's working for us.
Absolutely. And yet, in most cases, men get an entirely different message, which is, around conquests and power and, a good thing in a way, that to have many sexual partners or sex very regularly, or, it's a kind of big tick in the box for them versus a thing to be ashamed of as a woman. So it's a very different messaging depending on who you are. So what experience in your life do you think has challenged you the most and taught you something really valuable about yourself?
I think for me, it was coming out and sharing my story with the world. This was something, if you told me 15 years ago, I would be going on a podcast, I would be sharing on my Instagram page that I faked my orgasms for 15 years, I would have laughed at you and I would have said, there is absolutely no ways that girl would ever do that.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was a pivotal moment, because it took me about 6 months to do it. So I'm not saying it was easy and it was a decision I just took lightly. It took me a long time to work up the courage and the vulnerability to do that. But when I did, I realized that there was never anything ever wrong with me.
Yeah.
And this thing that I carried and felt so much shame about, this thing that I'd internalized for such a long time as this major problem in my life that made me so unlovable, was actually the thing that made me different and amazing and something that I could work on. And, now it's something that I support other women to overcome. And there's something for me profoundly magical in that. It's, overcoming one of your deepest, darkest fears and seeing that there's so much that lies on the other side and that you are so much more than just that.
Yeah. And almost like it's given you a key to this whole world that you never knew existed because no one talks about it. And then you start talking about it and you give others the permission to also talk about it and to be authentic themselves.
Yeah, and my whole life has changed as a result. When I look at the decision I made then, it was, I wanted to work on myself so I wouldn't have to fake it. And the tools and the skills I learned have changed every relationship I've had since then. I have the most beautiful relationship that I could never have imagined was possible, where we get to speak about everything so vulnerably and openly and honestly. I have tools to be able to do that now, which I didn't have before.
Yeah.
And it really is a stepping into all of who I am and not just the pieces that are shiny, attractive, and okay and presentable for the rest of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so important. And really, there's the whole ethos behind this podcast as well. So I love it. So what does living your truth mean to you now? And how do you apply it on a sort of day-to-day basis in your life?
So I think for me, it's listening to myself. So living my truth is really being in tune with myself and being honest with myself. Yeah. And it's something that is actually really hard, I think, for many of us to do at the moment. Yeah. I constantly have the question around social media: what do I post? What don't I post? Is this acceptable to post? Is this not acceptable to post? So I think that's such an important question and such a big question to actually answer, because there's so many pieces to it. But I think for me, my truth is really being in alignment with myself. Yeah. So the more I am honest with myself, the more I'm living my truth. And that honesty means recognizing all those parts, the really nice ones and the ones that are a little bit strange and the ones that are a little bit quirky, and giving all of those pieces a place to play. Yeah. So I think for many of us, it's, we have this one acceptable side that we get to show the world, and the rest is kind of wrong and hidden and secretive and concealed. Whereas for me, I feel all those parts are valid and I'm made up of all these pieces. So the more I get to give them a voice and express myself and be silly and laugh and not have everything perfect, the better off I am as an individual.
Yeah, amazing. What would you like to go back and tell your younger self now with the knowledge that you have?
So if I could go back, I would give my 5-year-old self a big hug and just let her know that her pleasure's okay and that what she was doing was never wrong. I think that always gets me because I feel so strongly about that little girl who felt something that felt so good to her and couldn't explain it and didn't know what it was, but already knew at the time that what she was doing was wrong, and really suppressed that side of herself that it's taken a tremendous amount of work. And I'm still on the journey of uncovering those pieces and coming back to that wholeness. So I would give her a really big hug and let her know that there's nothing wrong or shameful about what she's doing. Yeah. She's just enjoying herself.
Perfect. Yeah. So in the last season of this podcast, I talked about my dissatisfaction, for want of a better word, around that phrase, fake it till you make it. And I know you said that, you obviously spent 15 years of faking it, but what does that mean to you now, given everything that you've learned in the intervening period about being authentic, I suppose, and why it's so important not to fake it? And what does that mean to you?
So I think for me, I look back at my 16-year-old self and I know why she faked it. And, if she had to probably go back and do things again, it would be great if she had a little bit more information so she wouldn't have felt that was necessary. And I think there is a piece where sometimes you do have to fake it till you make it, right? Sometimes we just do have to do that. But when it comes to our sexuality in the bedroom, it's the understanding that when we're faking it, we're reinforcing this idea that what this other person is doing to us is actually enjoyable and we're enjoying that experience. Yeah. And so for me, the longer I did that, the more I had partners that couldn't support me, that had no idea what I liked. And the further I ever got from achieving that elusive orgasm, because I taught them that, I could orgasm in 5 minutes straight from very little clitoral stimulation. And that was all okay. And that was my doing, not their doing. I think it's also important to recognize a lot of our partners want to support us. They want to help us. They want us to enjoy pleasure, but they don't know how to do that. And so if we're not giving them accurate feedback and information, it's really difficult for them to support us.
So just keep doing what they think is working. Yeah,
exactly. Our role is to be honest with them. And I think honesty requires vulnerability. And that's something that a lot of us shy away from. And I think that's something that should be more normalized, is that we need to be vulnerable if we want to grow, if we want to create deeper connections with people. And it's scary to be the first one to go first and be vulnerable. Like, I totally get that. But if we really want to experience something different, if we really want to overcome a lot of what we're experiencing, we need to be more vulnerable, because I can guarantee that there's someone out there experiencing what you're experiencing, going through the same thing, and they're just waiting for you to share openly and from your heart. And that was my experience. When I opened up that I'd faked it, that I was doing this, suddenly out of the woodwork crawled so many people with exactly the same problems. And they were just too shy and afraid to speak up before that.
Yeah, absolutely. I can resonate with that in many different areas of life, that where you give people permission to share what's closest and dearest and hardest for them to share as well. So how do you think that our own judgment of ourselves affects our pleasure and our intimacy, whether that's our body or the shape of it, or what we want and what we desire, what we find pleasurable, down to the clothes that we're wearing? I know a lot around, young girls shouldn't wear short skirts because it invites unwanted attention. I was certainly brought up with that messaging. So how do all of those judgments play into the area of work that you look at?
So it prevents us from being our authentic selves, right? So if we're judging ourselves, if we're criticizing a part of who we are, we're going to suppress that piece and make it wrong, and it becomes the shadow. And then we start judging that in other people we see around us, right? So if you see someone wearing the short skirt that you've always wanted to wear because you thought it was sexy and beautiful, you're going to look and go, oh, she's a slut, she's a whore, she's wearing a mini skirt. And, when we see that, it's actually something really important because it's telling you something about yourself. Very often there's a suppressed desire there when you're judging or jealous of someone else or what someone else has. But not only that, it keeps us in our minds and our heads. So what happens, if we think of sex is a body-based experience, so it requires us to be present, to be in our bodies. And so for many of us, when we're judging, shaming, criticizing, feeling uncomfortable in our bodies, we're inside our heads, we're in our minds. Yeah. And this is where this overthinking comes from. So it's, I'm thinking, I'm worried, I'm not going to orgasm fast enough, I'm taking too long, he must be tired. All of those stories come from there. And so if we can let go of these judgments we're feeling about ourselves, so much becomes possible. But that's really hard. I mean, it's easy to say, let go of the judgment you're carrying for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can say that, and that's not going to change anything for anyone.
Yeah.
So for me, it's really getting to know yourself as an individual. And specifically when it comes to our bodies, becoming familiar with our bodies. One of the practices I give to all of my clients is a mirror-based practice. So the more comfortable you can get with just seeing yourself in the mirror and looking at yourself, the more comfortable you are with your body. And for many women, looking at themselves in the mirror with clothing feels hard. Never mind naked. Yeah. And that's such a powerful practice because, if you can get comfortable with yourself without judging, without criticizing, really looking at yourself and even taking it a step further and then giving yourself a compliment, noticing what is beautiful about you, what is unique about you, what is different about you. You start appreciating yourself. You start appreciating the body that you're in. And slowly but surely, you can start accepting the idea that someone else might see you and find you attractive or find you desirable or find you sexy. Because so many women, we get a compliment from our partner and they're like, oh, you look beautiful and stuff. Oh, no, I don't. I think I look fat in this, or I don't look attractive in this, right? And we dismiss the compliment. Yeah. We're not even open to receiving a compliment because we've judged ourselves so badly. And if we don't think we're deserving of love, it's going to be very hard to accept the love that's coming our way.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense. So you did allude to this earlier, but where else in your life have you seen impact as a result of being truly authentic in your sexuality?
It's impacted my entire life. I feel how I show up for myself, how I show up in my family, the relationships with my parents, with my siblings, the relationships with my friends, all of them have dramatically changed because I'm more truly me. So I feel like a safer person to be around for people because there's less judgment, there's less criticism. I've done a lot of work around that on my end. So I hold a much safer space for these people to come to me with their problems or what they're struggling with. I also feel I know what it is that I'm confident in terms of what I like and what I don't like. So I'll be very clear on that. So if I love something, you'll definitely know about it. If I don't like something, you'll also hear about it. Yeah. And again, those things sound frivolous and silly, but they're really important because if you're going out for dinner with someone and you want to ask them, is it okay what I'm wearing? And this person doesn't feel comfortable to say, oh no, I actually don't like that. Or maybe you should try something else on. And again, there's all these ways of saying these things. But when you feel confident and comfortable with who you are, people generally can feel at ease around you. There's also something magnetic about that, is what I've noticed. You become magnetic because you're owning all aspects of yourself. There isn't this part that feels repressed or uncomfortable or strange or weird. You are who you are. And people want to be around people that feel comfortable with themselves.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, this has been such an amazing conversation. Almost sad to wrap it up, really. But yeah, I've so enjoyed talking to you about this. And like you say, bringing into the light an area that so many people, I think, continue to repress or suppress, and understanding why it's important to be totally unapologetic in our sexuality as much as in any other area of our life, and how that can ripple out into all of our relationships, friendships, our work, our life satisfaction ultimately. So thank you so much for what you've shared with us today. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, Helen. I've absolutely loved being on here. And thank you so much for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for listening to this episode of Becoming Unapologetically Me. Make sure you subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts so you never miss an episode.